Hello, back with a single malt review. Dave and Tim here, and we are sampling today one of the all-time classic blended Scotch whiskies.
Yeah, it's a big one. It's an important one. It's one of the whisky leviathans. It is, to my knowledge, and I'll be the first to tell you, the most popular 12-year-old blend on the market, and I think it has been for practically ever, I think. So, what it is, of course, is Johnnie Walker Black Label blended Scotch whisky. The 12-year-old, you'd have to say, which is interesting for reasons I'll get into a bit further down the hole. But what it is, of course, blended whisky, not blended malt, not vatted malt, blended whisky, so the normal stuff. And it's a Diageo joint, just like the bells that we did earlier today, only a little bit more illustrious, I suppose you'd say.
Probably a little more peaty.
Well, it is, and that brings me to the point I mentioned earlier. It's interesting that this is so dominant as a 12-year-old blend because it's actually doesn't represent the norm for 12-year-old blends at all. This is, and you'll have to see if you agree or not, but I consider this a peated blend. It's only just a peated blend, but it is definitively a peated blend, I think. It's not as peated as, say, Teachers.
Or double black.
Or double black, which the sole purpose of double black is to up the peat and sell, based on the fashionable Islay whisky thing. But this, at least in my sort of internal tasting profile, is a peated blend. Because peat is probably its most dominant flag for me, and it's how I'd be able to tell it apart from really any other 12-year-old blend in the world. Certainly its closest competitors, the Shivers and so forth, mostly Shivers, I think, next in the popularity line there for 12-year-olds. But we will dig in and see what we find, and I'll ruminate on what makes it so unique and maybe so popular. So it's, in terms of face value, very, very similar to any other 12-year-old blend on the market. It is 40%. It is chill filtered. It is coloured. And all of these to a fairly heavy extent. So we shall take very little from its appearance. Never mind. On the nose, it is gentle and it is dry. And that's something that's going to come up again. It's a very, very dry nose.
Yeah, it's mild,
and it's a very dry whisky.
Delicate.
And the peat is there. It's there from the outset, but it's
just a very faint kind of a tobacco smoke whiff in the distance.
It's a dry peat as well. It's sort of a driftwood. There's no huge iodine tang on it. It's not too reminiscent of Islay whisky in any capacity, even though there is Islay whisky in here, I'm fairly sure.
So, it reminds me of someone in the next room has recently smoked a cigarette. That kind of level of smokiness.
Yeah, I guess that would work. It's a faint, almost faint enough that if you weren't looking for it, it could go unnoticed. And I think that's sort of part of the beauty of the Black Label, the 12-year-old from Johnnie Walker, is that it's been so meticulously blended. It just sort of one flavour can weave into the next, and unless you're looking at it with a sort of analytical eye that we do, or an analytical taste bud, you might not pick out anything at all. You might just sort of drift away along for the ride, and I think that's probably the intent. But we'll be a bit sterner than that in our tasting of it, and we will see what we can find.
How much grain typically goes into a Johnnie Walker blend?
Johnnie Walker, unless they have a particular, unless they do things particularly differently, and I have no reason to believe they do, grain whisky is normally around 60% to 40% malt. This can change. Teachers, of course, says that it contains a high proportion. Exactly how high, who knows? But we'll assume that's a little bit more than the 40%. This, I would be fairly surprised if it was anything too different to that 60-40 ratio. That's sort of the tried and true and cheap way of doing it. So yeah, if someone has more specific knowledge on that, then please let us know. But 60-40 is what I'm going to run with for this one. But speaking of the grain, comparing this maybe unfairly, but it's still another Edrington, goodness me, there's a faux pas, Diageo product. Whereas the Bells we tasted a couple of episodes ago, that had a very, very keen grain note on it. This one This one really doesn't. It's gentle, it's peaty, and it's the malt. It's the malt that you pick up on the nose.
Well, just taking a good long sip on that, and the most immediate surprising flavour there is a strong, clear hit of lemon, like a lemon juice. Very strong, very sharp, very citrus, with a long, dry finish and just a hint of sooty smoke at the end.
Yeah, citrus is quite good. It is a sharp whiskey. It's sharp and it's dry. It has a good acid note to it, so it's sort of quite mouth-watering, but it is not a lush whiskey. It is not a rich whiskey, and that's pretty daring, I think, because that's where it's really, really very different, because things like Shivers is quite delicate. They're big 12-year-old, but it's sort of sweet and it's rich and it's gentle and it's middle of the road, and it kind of is, without being too disparaging, very whiskey flavoured kind of a thing. I think we've even reviewed Shivers back in the dark ages. You could sort through the videos and find it, but it's fine, and it really is kind of what you expect when you pick up any particular 12-year-old blend. Black Label is not. Black Label has its own, so dances to its own tune, and that's what makes it so surprising that it's so dominant and so popular, because I would have thought it'd be a bit more niche, because that citrus is a good one, but there's sort of driftwood, there's almost like a sort of a very, very light, maybe not quite sawdust, but wood shavings, a little bit of sandalwood shaving in here, but it's all very dry, it's very light-bodied, and it is significantly peaty.
Yeah. I think that's possibly working in its favour here. Well, I do like whiskey normally to be lush and sweet and rich. In this case, for drier, more acid properties, I think are harmonising better with the grain alcohol. There's less of a jarring juxtaposition there. They blend in, you should hope for a blended whiskey, quite effectively, so you get a more consistent overall flavour. There aren't different forces competing for the attention of your taste buds.
And as with the nose, the presence of the grain is remarkably well hidden. It's not what you pick up. And I think that's a testament to how well it's put together, how well it's blended, how meticulously or mathematically it's put together, that it's really only right on the end does the grain does the sort of cover fall off, the camouflage falls away, and suddenly it is blended whiskey, and you've got this young-ish, I should say, nothing under 12 years old, presumably, grain flavour that's now a bit more exposed. But it really takes a very long time. It's only right at the end of the finish that you get significant grain whiskey, which must be quite hard to achieve. Grain whiskey is almost ubiquitously sweet and malty. It's very, very difficult to hide that sweetness when you're dealing with grain. It's one of the few things it actually tastes of. But they manage to kind of hide it under the couch, or whatever analogy you want here, such that you only see the nice, presentable cushions of malt whiskey, and that's quite cleverly done, I think. As for what malt whiskey is in here, Diageo has a very large portfolio of distilleries to play with, more than anybody else, I think, in one hamper. And they have a lot of Islay whiskies as well. So being able to narrow down what peated whiskey is in here, that's a bit tricky. In Diageo's swag bag, they have Collila, Lagavulin, and Talisker. So whether they could have used all three for all we know. I think there is some Collila, which is famously lemon citrus in terms of its character, in terms of its peaty character, and I think there's some Talisker in here as well, because Talisker is it's a very crisp, very dry, but also very sharp whiskey, which this has quite a lot in common with. It is in no way remotely as peaty as any of those single malts. The peat is still only probably 10% of this one's flavour profile is probably peat, but that 10% is huge, because it's normally 0% or between 1 and 5% for most blended whiskey. So for it to be as dominant as it is quite, I would have called it quite dangerous, because I would have thought that people that didn't like peated whiskey, and there are many, many, many of those people out there, they'd be turned off. But that doesn't happen for some reason. This is a monstrously popular whiskey. So I guess that's just the secret that the blenders have there, between that and the sort of prestige of the label, and that this is one of the oldest 12-year-old whiskies around. It's very, very established. It is just so wildly popular. But yeah, luckily I'm not one of those people. I really quite like this whiskey. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'd say for scores, this one is a satisfying and very well crafted blend. It's been balanced nicely. It's got a good, unique character. It's earned its huge share of the global blended whiskey market, and I'd give it 76 points.
Yeah, and so keep in mind this is a blend score, so don't butt this one up against other single malts. But I'd go quite a wee bit higher than that. I think this is a remarkably and daringly different blend, and the fact that it can be so different, so unique, so its own thing, and still maintain this huge market share that it does is fairly, I think, brave in today's market. And it's a blend that it just stands alone. It's so unlike other 12-year-old blends in so many ways that I can kind of appreciate it doing things differently. There's a few places where it kind of falls down. I would say do not have this one with water or ice. I think it rides right on the edge of where it drinks best at that 40%. I'd love to try 46 or even a 50% version of this. I think that would be quite stunning if they were to do a special edition. But the moment water hits this thing, the air gets taken out of it. It deflates. It cannot deal with water, in my opinion anyway, at all. So sort of the ice cube you might hurl at your other 12-year-old blends, and for good reason, nothing wrong with a shivers with an ice cube any day of the week. I'd steer away from that because I have experimented and the results have been poor. If this gets any more dilute than it is, it really, really fails. It's a very, very precise thing, I think, and it's teetering on that edge of too much water. And if it goes down even a few percent, it just topples. I think so. Be very, very careful. But I'm just realising here I haven't actually given my score, and I'm going off to the preamble. But scores, yeah, this is good. It's a really good 12-year-old. It's an 87 from me. Standing against other 12-year-old blends we've tasted, it's I don't know if it's absolutely my favourite, but if it's not, it's damn close to it. I think the now long lost Ballantine's 12. I think might have edged it out in terms of my score. I have to go and have a look. That is another one quite dear to me, which I will never taste again, as far as Ballantine's is concerned, because they've discontinued all their aged blends. Anyway, this one, you really probably don't need us to recommend it, but we will anyway. Johnnie Walker 12-year-old. Popular for a reason, and that reason is it's quite good. So if you haven't tried it, you probably owe it to yourself as a whiskey drinker to codify that in your mind, because it's a whiskey that a great many others are going to be compared to. It's a bit unavoidable, even if you don't like it. It's one of those ones that you should probably be familiar with. Just like, I don't know, I hate fresh tomatoes, but I should still know what tomatoes taste like, just so I know when to complain. So yeah, it's a whiskey standby, and everyone should be familiar with it. That's not to say it should just be weighed in there and be revered because it's so popular. If you don't like it, you don't like it. I mean, tell us why. I'd be fascinated if it has any detractors out there, because I'm sure it must. I'm certain there must be people that hate Black Label because they hate peated whiskey, or they hate dry whiskey, or something like that. They just seem to be in, blessedly for the Johnnie Walker, for Diageo, small numbers. But anyway, I think I've gone long enough on that one. We will roll along onto what's next. We've got this and that. It might be time for a bourbon. The clock has struck, and it has struck Kentucky. That makes very little sense, so we'll end. Slanger! See you next time.